Hi lovely folks, and welcome back. Now in the last video we got our shoulder seams sewn on and the first two sides of our square underarm gussets. In this video we're going to be forming these sleeves. We'll be sewing down the lengths and we'll be getting the third side of the underarm gusset secure. I'll show you how to fold and tuck all the little seam allowances and things into place and which order I do it in to get it all looking really neat and tidy. So by the end of this video, you'll really see your garment starting to take shape. Let's go. So when we left off last time, this is what we had. We had our shoulder piece sewn in all the way down and two sides of that gusset complete. By the end of this video, the underside of our sleeve is going to look like this. You see here, we'll have three of those gusset sides sewn in and this long seam down to the cuff all finished. Okay. So we had that all pressed and lovely. We've got it right side out at the moment. What we need to do is flip it, turn it all inside out again, and then we can start pinning all this into place. So you're going to have this edge facing upwards. The top of the sleeve will be down the bottom, out of the way, so that we can manipulate all of this. Now this stage is incredibly important. Getting this all pinned exactly right now will save you an awful lot of headaches later, so it's worth taking the time to do it properly. I begin with the end of my sleeve here, the cuff piece. I'm just going to match these two up to begin with. Pop a couple of clips in this end to keep those exactly where you want them. And you'll see just there, that's cut on the grain there, and you can see it just starts to become bias cut there where all these little fluffy bits are starting. I pin just up to about here at this stage so that I'm really happy that that end is where I want it. Now we're going to come up to this end. Now this is the side of the sleeve that's attached to the main body. There's no gusset piece attached here yet. We're going to be attaching this gusset side. That's where the gusset joins down to the sleeve, and this corner is going to match up with this corner here. So I fold that down out of the way, lay that one on top of the other, exactly where I want it. So make sure that I've got my seam allowances all the way around. Pop a clip in there. You pop it in, think, oh, actually that's a little bit wonky. Do it again. Try not to put any tension on that. You don't want it to be pulling. Just fold it down out of the way so that it's not going to interfere when you're sewing this corner. You can, if you wish, just pop a little clip on there to hold that down out of the way. Now what we've got is this enormous wibbly wobbly snaky thing. So we're going to come up this way a little bit. We're going to pop a pin in the middle of our gusset there, or a clip if you're using clips. This is where clips are so much easier again, because they're much quicker to move about if you're not exactly happy with the tension. So once I've done that, then I move back down to the bottom of the sleeve, because this bit here is the tricky bit, where if there's any slack, if there aren't any bits that aren't quite right, you can adjust and make sure that you're happy. So back down here, and now I'll stretch it out, lay it flat as if it's folded in half like this, and match up my edges, making sure that there's nothing pulling, there's no weird creases underneath, they're matching up exactly. Pop a clip in the middle there. I'll have a little look at how that's looking like it's going to be fine. We'll pin all this up and then we'll come back and do this bit right at the end. So when we get to the point where we're going to be pinning these last bits into place, hold that one nice and flat, pop a clip in there. You may need to move slightly in a moment. Then we need to check this side. It appears I have a bit of thread there that I didn't want, so pull that out the way and match it up. And you can adjust this when you get right in close to make sure you're happy. So if I pinch to there and I pinch that side, that's all coming together beautifully. What you don't want is an extra loop of fabric here. You don't want it to be too tight there. You want it so that when you fold both back, that lays flat and that lays flat. Now what I'm feeling there is a little tiny bit of excess. This can happen because maybe you've used a slightly larger seam allowance here or a slightly smaller one. This is where experience and just taking your time with it will come in, because it will get easier to make these adjustments once you've done it once. You'll become more confident with it. So just have a play until you are happy that everything's meeting where you want it to. Now what you can do is take that clip off. If you want to just do it this way, you can slide that down a bit, have a little bit of excess there to take up that slack. But what I would suggest is trying to even it out as best you can at this stage rather than going downwards. Try and keep all the seam allowances exactly together where you want them. Now I could move it up that way, I could move it up that way. I'm just going to have a feel and see what feels best, because I know that those two are in the right place, that one there and that one there. So there's a little bit of excess for me to choose which way I want it to go. In this case, I'll probably take it that way because that can just tuck under there. And what we've ended up with is just a few millimetres of extra that side. That bit really doesn't matter. It's far better to have a tiny bit extra at this point than to not have enough. So I'm happy I can start sewing at that. I'm going to show you on the other sleeve just because it's reversed. It's the other way around, so it looks a little bit different, but actually it isn't. So here with the other sleeve, we're going to do the same again. We're going to start with our cuff, match those two ends up nicely, pin them into place. Come on up to our gusset piece, and then once again we're going to do exactly the same. Match those two up, making sure that that's folded back out of the way. That'll be more important when we get to sewing it. Pop that second clip in and just flip over and make sure you're happy with where everything is. And we're going to pin up this part of the sleeve and then get our little fiddly bit done right at the end. And then when we get to this part, once again you can see it's a little bit easier to see this way around. If we pinch all that together, that should come together as a perfect point, but I'm just a couple of millimetres out. So again, I'm going to choose to run the sleeve up first and put the excess on the end there. It's all going to get tucked in at the end, so it won't matter. Having a tiny bit extra is not a big deal at this point. And there we go, we've got both sleeves all pinned up and ready to sew. I'll be back in a second to show you the methods for sewing these all together. Okay, we're now ready to start sewing the third side of this underarm gusset in. Remember how I said this is the side that you're going to see, so So this is the side you want to work on so you can see your stitches, to keep everything neat and tidy. But to fix your thread, you're going to fix it underneath. And you're going to fix it just at that point there where this last line of back stitching finishes. So we're going to pop our needle as close as we can, just the next thread over from that hole. I'm going to secure it in the back so that the thread tail is on the wrong side. Lovely. So we'll come back out here. Now what we're going to do is just back stitch all the way down to here. When I get there, I'm going to stop and show you what to do with just this little join bit here, because it's a little bit tricky and you need to keep the stitching quite tight so you don't end up with a sort of odd gaping bit there that has stitching showing. So I'll be back with you in a moment. When I get to the last few stitches, I want to make sure I'm lining up absolutely as close as possible to that last stitch there. Popped my clip on to give me a line to work to as I was coming up to it. I'm going to get those last stitches in, and then we're going to start moving in to sewing up this sleeve side. Just going to check that none of that's about to get caught in my stitching. You can trim it off if you want to. I'm going to do my last back stitch and making sure that my needle comes up as close to that one as possible. And then we're going to come down through here and back up the same hole again. You can knot the thread here if you wish, you don't have to, but if you want to, just to knot that in, make sure it's absolutely firmly in place, you can do. Then we're going to come back through just a couple of threads up, and then we need to be opening this up and making sure that we're going through right in the middle of that join, pop out the other side. Now that's all finished. We need to fold that just back out of the way while we secure in the first couple of stitches here. These are fiddly, this bit takes a little bit of time to get right, but once you've got the hang of it, you'll have lovely strong joins to work with. So use your fingers, make sure you're happy, then go in just below those stitches you've just made to make your first back stitch for this one. Loop back again through that original hole, pop a couple of back stitches in there, and then we're just going to have a look and check that we're happy with everything. Pull that apart gently. Yep, everything looks to be meeting really well. So I'm going to do a few more back stitches down to about here, and then I'm going to switch to my running back stitch, just like I did when I was sewing the long shoulder seams. You can quite happily just use a running back stitch along here and not risk it coming open. It's just this top bit here that's going to take a little bit more force and needs the reinforcement. If you've made your sleeves to the size indicated when we were doing the patterning in my measurement guide diagrams and things like that, you should have plenty of ease around the top of your sleeve, so they won't be too tight and they're not going to pop. If you're using arm guards underneath your tunic, if you're a warrior, you may want to backstitch this bit as well if it's somewhere that tends to go on clothing for you, but only you're going to know what's going to be needed for your level of activity. However, for me, I always find a running back stitch here is more than sufficient, especially once all this is felled down, because that provides an extra layer of protection for the seam. So I'm going to leave this one here, and we're going to switch over and just look at doing this very top bit the other way round on the other sleeve, just so you've got a visual on that, because it will look a little bit different. And here we are on our other sleeve again. These are the two sides all backstitched into place already, and we're going to be backstitching with this side facing us to get those matching stitches nice and neat. We will also, as we did with the other one, be fixing our thread on the back and the bit of the seam that's going to be covered by the felling. So we'll start again there. Just make sure I'm happy with that. Sometimes you'll find once you've turned it over and moved about a bit and been working on the other one that something's moved slightly and you're not overly happy anymore. So you can just take a moment to even that all up until you're 100% before you start stitching. Yep, lovely. Fixed our thread, so we're going to flip over and start stitching. Then once I've got to this last little bit, I'm going to start checking I'm happy with where everything's laying still. Yes, I am. Pop my last few back stitches in. Pop out close to that point there. Last back stitch of the gusset piece, and then back in to pop out over here. So I just come over the stitch, and then you can either go through to that side and then over, which is sometimes easier. Do that for now. Okay, come out that side, and then we need to move all this that way. Take this clip off, smooth everything down. What you can do here is just pop that clip on that bit for a minute to keep it out of the way. Pinch that, come back through to the front here. Just see where that needle's coming out. If you're not happy, just ease it back so that it's coming out exactly where you want it. Do these first couple of stitches really slowly and deliberately, making sure you're happy with the placement, and then you carry on whip stitching down. Not whip stitching, back stitching down. So I've gone down about an inch, inch and a half with back stitch. I'm now going to switch to a running back stitch, and I'll be back to show you how we get all these seams folded into place and felled down in just a minute. Okay, so here we are. We've got our back stitched gusset in place, and we've got this whole long length all sewn together. The next stage is going to be trimming out the seam allowances so that we can fold these over and get them felled down. The very first thing we need to do is make a little cut here. This is an awkward angle where things don't quite want to fold in a nice neat way, but we can coax it to. So what I'm going to do is, if you imagine if that's going all the way over to that side, we need to make a cut down almost to the stitch line. We're not going to cut right down to the stitches. We're going to go down just here where it's about to meet so that it can slide round and tuck down that way. So that's my gusset piece there. That's my sleeve piece. Where this join is, I'm going to take my scissors and just make a little cut and show you what happens when I do. So I've left about 4 threads there, but what that means is that that will sit really nicely round there, and that will all sit flat on top of it when it's folded down. If you're not quite happy with how far down it's come, or you think you need to go back that way a bit, it's no problem. Just make another little snip back this way, making sure not to cut any of this seam allowance from the top of the gusset. Now we need to trim away this piece because we're folding that back that way, and then we need to trim this piece. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to find where I started last time. This bit is fiddly. Take your time with it and make sure you're cutting the right bit, and make sure you're not cutting anything that you're actually going to want to be using for your felled seam. So that's where I stopped when I was doing that part of the gusset. I'm going to carry on now, trim this all the way down. So now what I do, before we do anything else with this top bit here, is just get that secured down. Just the first couple of inches, pop a couple of pins in so that that's all tucked down nicely out of the way. So finger press it and make sure that this part and this part are both equal either side of this. You don't want any loops forming either way. Clamp down with my thumb there, and then I just tuck it under nice and neatly. Pop a couple of pins in. So that first bit is now secure. What we need to do is just trim away this seam allowance under here. Then, before we pin this, we're going to start whip stitching that down so that's all secure before we do anything up here. Trimmed away that excess all the way along here. Now the reason that I'm going to start sewing this down before we get to this part is that we want this to be really neat and strong when it's finished. We want the angle to be nice as well. So I'm going to pop a few whip stitches in there and then come back and show you what we're doing with this bit. So coming right to the end of this, making sure it's tucked just a little bit underneath. I'm going to pop a couple of whip stitches in here to tack that down. Okay, so that's done. I'm going to pop that in there for a minute. Now we're going to get this bit pinned into place. So evening it out, making sure there's nothing pulling. I'm going to finger press that backwards over that cut edge. Come right up this way and start turning it under from this end. Now, what we've got here is a slightly awkward little point. It's where things meet at an angle and it's not going to want to lay flat. So what we do, we fold that side over, ease it round, and then once we're happy that we've got that exactly where we want it, fold that corner in, ease that round as well. It will fight you. It will be a little bit tricky at first, but try and get the point of the corner to line up with that initial line of back stitch there. If you can't get it exactly, don't worry. Put it in the middle. As long as you've folded that into a point and tucked all of those raw edges really nicely out of the way, it's not going to be a problem. And then making sure that that bit's straight as you pin it. Pop your pin in right on the edge to hold that in place. Then ease this side round so that that's happy. Pop another pin in here. It will look a little bit crumpled, but as you work your way along sewing that in, it will be absolutely fine. Here's the little bit of whip stitching thread that I left from doing this bit. I'm going to use this and carry on around the corner And then if I need to, add another piece in to do that. So when I'm ready, out comes that pin. The other one there is still holding that all nice and tucked down. Any little loose threads you've got, you can tuck those in at this stage. And then we're just going to carry on with that line of whip stitching to secure this gusset down before we go back and finish the rest of the arm. Once you get close, pop your pin out and you'll find that that wants to sit quite happily now in its corner. Once you've sewn all the way round to here, stop just before you get to this edge. When you pop your last stitch in here, making sure you're not catching anything underneath that shouldn't be being caught. What we're going to do is, instead of stopping there and having a little flappy bit here, just going to think ahead to the next bit. Now that's going to be attached there. That is your seam that you've already done. That's your shoulder seam. And all these seam allowances are going to end up being folded over together. So at this point, hold on to everything. Make sure you're happy that it's all lined up nicely. And then you can fell this last bit of seam allowance down onto the seam allowance for this bit up the top. You don't have to do this, you can just leave a little bit of a gap there, but I prefer just to fell it on so that everything is exactly where I want it and it's not going to move, it's not going to catch, and I don't have to come back and do it later. So at this point I'm felling all the way through all of these seam allowances. This is the equivalent to that very first seam we did when we were attaching the shoulder piece to the gusset. Just stop there, tie it off, and leave your thing loose. Got two loose ones here now. This one can start going along. If it breaks, take over with that one. And come back to that next video, or video after next. Now, that's all sorted out, and what I need to do is fell this down all the way along. We've already trimmed it, so it's ready to go. You can either do this all, pin it all in one go and work your way down. I find that I tend to stab myself a lot. If I do that, all the pins dig in and they come out and they're not very easy to manipulate. So what I would suggest is just pinning 2 pins at a time, doing one, then moving the next pin up. Always making sure that when you're turning this edge and flattening it down, that you're not getting any loops from this side under here or vice versa. Make sure everything's nice and flat. Pop your pins in. And then you're ready to work on this bit. Go all the way down. Now, if working with this big bunched up piece of fabric feels a little bit uncomfortable or daunting for you, there is a slightly different method that I'm going to show you next, whereby you don't do this line of stitching all the way down, but instead do a bit at a time, fell it down, do another bit, fell it down. So while other me is getting this all felled flat, I'll show you that other method. Okay, so here we have our other sleeve. With this alternative method, the prep is almost the same, but not quite. Again, the first thing we need to do is get this folded over that way. You could choose to take it that way if you wanted to. I find it a lot easier to always work in this direction down the sleeve. You're going to find your own method once you've got the hang of all these different steps and find what works best for you. This is how it's easiest for my hands. So again, we're going to need to snip away this seam allowance. Now you can see when we cut the seam allowance to do this part of the gusset, we've already taken it almost all the way down. So what we need here is just another little snip to free it off enough to easily turn. Don't want to go all the way through, you just want it to lay flat nicely that way. So once you've got that mobile, you can forget about that bit, tuck it out the way. This time we've got this extra tag on it, so we're going to take that off as well, just straight, so that we've got plenty to fold over. You can choose to do it angled if you'd like to make sure you've got enough to turn under this bit. I'll show you when we get to that bit exactly what I mean. So you can snip it at an angle if you want to. But as long as you're tidying down everything nice and neatly, it's not going to be a problem. This time, because we're the other way around, we're going to be trimming off a straight line all along the gusset and along the sleeve piece. Whichever method you're choosing, this will be the same with either side. Just got to do this slightly different part of the procedure, because on the other way around, this is the seam that would be felling down. This one's already finished. So we're going to cut this down. Instead of doing it all the way, we're going to stop, and I'll show you where in just a second. Now, you can see here, I've not sewn all the way down this. So why am I starting my felling if I've not got all this done? Well, as I said before, when you're shoving your whole hand inside a completed sleeve to try and do it all the way down, it can be a bit tricky. So instead of doing it all in one, we can do it section by section instead. And I'll show you what I mean now. So instead of turning that whole lot over, what we're going to do is take off a few of these clips. Don't panic, all these are still holding it in place, so we're not going to lose the tension and we're not going to end up with things in the wrong place, because all of that at the end is still clipped together. We're going to make a little poppet hole for our hand. Press this seam with our fingers again and pop a couple of clips in, just like we did with the other one. And just as before, we're going to do this little bit first before we do anything else, so that when we come to do the gusset, it's all going to be tucked in nicely. So we've done that initial line of whip stitching there, we've tacked that down, so we're now ready to pin all this into place, ready for sewing that together. I like to get that bit done before I move on to the rest of it, again because it means once I get to the end, I'm done with that section. So I'll show you that now. This one I'm going to start in the middle. It's just easier that way, and it involves less messing about, because you can make sure to get that first fold lovely and neat in the middle there, and then the ends can work themselves out. So pop our pin in. See this end here? Just going to roll that a bit further over so that the seam allowance is tucked right down. Roll it round this way. Just manipulate it with your fingers until you're happy with where it's laying, because again, this is a pointy triangular weird corner with lots of strange stresses on it from different directions. So it's going to feel a bit odd, but just take your time and get everything pinned where you want it before you start sewing. And if that tries to roll out again, which is that is already trying to do, it's a tricky little what's it, I'm going to encourage it back into place. Fold this under. Try and have it roughly lining up with that line of back stitching there. Now that's sticking out a little bit. We can tuck that in just as we get to that point. Now on the other arm, remember what I said about these first stitches involving all of these seam allowances. So what we're going to do is just unfold that, fold it back onto itself there. If if I turn it over, that first bit of sewing is going to be on these seam allowances, not through this seam allowance and that piece of fabric. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're not sure, just leave that, don't do anything with it, and start your stitching there. Just pop the clip on to hold it in place while I get my thread ready, and then I'll be ready to whip stitch all the way along there. So the first few stitches, just catching this seam allowance here, then we're going to switch around and start actually felling the gusset seam allowance down onto the piece below. There we go, that's all just catching in there. Hard to see, I know, but it will make sense once you start playing with it. So now I've slid my finger back, my finger's just under here. I'm not doing anything with that bit anymore. That's all pushed to that side, and we're going to sew along here. Lovely neat whip stitches all the way down. Now again, as I just get to this corner, which is the slightly tricky bit, I'm just making sure any little loose threads are tucked in and out of the way. I'm also making sure that this is all laying flat on the bit that I sew, so there's no weird rucked up bits that are going to irritate or pull strangely on the outside. Very carefully around these last few little bits. Very soon we'll have sleeves. Here's where that was trying to come out the way I didn't want it to, so I'm going to use my fingers just to tuck it in, tuck it down as I go around this corner. Even if you have to readjust with every stitch you do, it's worth it, just slowing down for this bit to make sure you're happy with where everything's laying, because you don't want this to be sticking up at a strange angle and tickling under your arms. Just adjust your work each time so that you can get a good angle and be confident where you're placing your stitches. As I will say many times in this video, I expect by now, this is fiddly, but it's worth the time and effort for the results, I think. So there we go. That gusset seam is all nicely felled down now. Everything's nice and neat and strong. We've carried on this whip stitch up to about here, and what you will notice is we now have two needles. Two needles, yes. So what's this all about then? Well, as I showed you before, when you've got a gap here, it's a lot easier to manipulate this seam than it is once the whole thing is sewn together and you're trying to hold all that fabric up. So if you find that tricky, try it this way. That very top bit's just the same. We're going to pop back the clips that we took off, making sure that this is all lovely and in line and exactly where we want it. And then this time we're going to just sew down a little way, make a new hole there to put our hand through, fell that bit down. Same again, fell that bit down, and just work our way along. I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like, and then while I'm busy getting all that finished off to show you the finished article at the end, we're going to have a little bit of a chat about what's different with wool. So you can see what I'm doing there is just my simple line of running back stitch, a few running stitches, popping in a little back stitch every now and then just to give it a little bit of extra strength. And I'm making sure that I'm not pulling the thread too tight so that the fabric lays lovely and flat as we go along. Once you get to this point, You can tie a little knot there if you feel more comfortable, or you can just leave your thread loose, tuck your needle into your fabric. Be careful not to stab yourself with it. Again, take off a few clips, make a hole. We're going to flip it over, trim off this little bit of seam allowance till just before where we finish stitching, and then fill it down. Always being very careful not to catch the seam allowance that you're going to be turning. Silly me. Luckily I caught it before it went too far. Again, take that needle out so you can work with the fabric more easily. Finger press it, make sure that it's sitting exactly where you want it to be. It's not rolling to either side. And then start folding down your seam allowance. You can pin this little section, or you can just pin one ahead. It's entirely up to you. The length of these sections, again, is your choice, what you feel comfortable working with. But the method then is the same all the way down. Running stitch a little bit, fill the seam behind it. Running stitch a little bit more, fill the seam behind it. So hopefully that method's lovely and clear. While I get on with this and finish sewing down all of this seam to show you what we've got at the end, we're going to have a little bit of a chat and a reminder about what you can do differently when it comes to working with wool. Okay, what we have here is a woolen sleeve finished using that exact same method that I recommend for linen. All of the seam allowances have been folded and tucked under all the way around, and that's the effect that you get at the end. Now, if your wool is well fulled and isn't likely to fray, there is of course the alternative, which is instead of rolling that under like it is there, is simply to fold that seam allowance down, making sure of course that you've got your pieces completely separate before you lay it down, so you're not looping up on the other side, and then just using slightly wider stitches, whip stitch that down flat. Exact same thing can be done up here with these corners. Lay them down and whip stitch them. It's a lot less fiddly. I'll give it that as a method. If you're struggling with all the folding corners on the linen ones, you may want to try this for your wool garments if this wool isn't too friable. This one's fairly good, but it does start to go after a while, which is why I've chosen the turning method for this garment. I just also really like how it looks, and I don't mind a slightly bulkier seam as a price. But if you want to do that, you want to just lay it flat and then whip stitch over it, absolutely fine. Again, you can lay a cord over that if you wish, or instead of trimming it and laying it flat, you can just whip stitch the seam allowances together and leave it as a raised seam. I wouldn't recommend that. I would always recommend tacking these seams down flat, because this will get a lot more wear and get tatty a lot quicker than if you fold it down. And when you just whip stitch along the edge like that, you lose the extra strength that fell gives you. By folding it to the side, you give it an extra line of stitching and an extra line of strength. So my recommendation would be to either fold it under if it's thin enough, or just fell it flat with your whip stitches, making sure to make those whip stitches a little bit deeper and wider to allow for catching down all of these little threads, because again this sleeve is cut on the bias, so what you're seeing here is all these little loose edges starting to raise because it's cut at an angle. So either choice is absolutely fine. Pick which one works best for you. I will be back shortly to show you our finished sleeve lengths and our finished third side of gusset. And here we are. We have 2 pairs of gussets all fully sewn in and done, and the length of our sleeve sewn together and felled. If we take a look at the woolen one, exactly the same, both sides all nicely finished. There's nothing more we need to do to these bits. However, there's one thing we need to do on the cuffs, and that is to hem them, and that's what we're going to cover in the next video. You can see here those 3 sides of the gusset all nicely tucked in. These 2 corners are finished with everything folded under and tightly held down. So none of this is going to come loose and irritate you or end up causing you to have pulls and holes in the corners of your seams. This is the underarm gusset for our linen garment. You can see there where the gusset point is meeting the length of the arm. Got these 2 sides in here, and all that's left to do is this last side and then down onto fixing our gauze. When we look on the right side, we can see now that those are all neatly felled in. Everything's looking lovely on the right side. At this point, I give it a little press before I move on to doing the cuffs. So if you're pressing your seams as you go, now's the time to do that. All this down here is looking very raggedy and open still. Don't worry, we will get to it. And the same again with our woolen example. If we hold it this way round, this is the part that's going to be underneath your arm, and it's all neatly tucked in, looking lovely and strong. And there we are, 4 sleeves almost complete. And with that complete, we have sleeves! Yay! Now, I know that was a little bit trickier than what we did last time with all the kind of folding and tucking and getting everything into place, but hopefully it all made sense. If you've got any questions, as always, pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to help you out. Now, in the next one, we're going to look at hemming these cuffs. Now, if you're making tight fitting sleeves, you can go ahead and do this now, because the size of your hand here will stop them from falling down. No concerns there. However, if you're someone who wants those looser sleeves that you can roll up, you may want to hold off on that next one until after you've got all your gauze sewn in, because then you can try the garment on without any risk to these delicate seams under the arms here that haven't been sewn together yet. It's worth waiting and then coming back and doing this last step once you've got that done. So either way, whether I'm going to be seeing you in the next video or you're coming back to visit, have a wonderful day and I will see you soon. Bye bye.